All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Online and Professional Education Leadership and Innovation webinar series. My name is Dejanay Beaver, and I'm a program manager for Michigan Engineering Online and Professional Education. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. You are welcome to ask questions throughout the presentation by putting them in chat or raising your hand via Zoom. There will also be a dedicated question and answer period following the presentation. And now it's time to welcome today's speaker, Preet Gill. Preet Gill is a seasoned executive with a strong focus on sustainability and digitalization. As the head of sustainability and digitalization at ZF's Electronics and ADAS division, Preet has been instrumental in driving business growth through innovative and sustainable practices. His expertise lies in assessing, identifying, and maximizing opportunities across various stages of company development, from startups to large companies. Preet's commitment to sustainability is evident in his strategic approach to integrating eco-friendly solutions with AI-led digital transformation. And now I'll turn it over to you, Preet. Welcome.
Dejanay, thank you for joining. Uh, Thanks for that introduction. It makes me feel that I'm okay. I won't say much there, but once again, thank you for joining. My name is Preet Gill. You already know that. I'm part of ZF. I'll say a couple words about my company, and we'll also refer to some of their strategic direction for sustainability a little later as well. For those of you who might not know those names, ZF or ZF as we call them, is Zahnrad Fabrik Friedrichshafen. It's a German automotive supplier. We are by volume the third largest supplier of automotive components. If you drive a vehicle or if you travel on a public transportation, transportation solution, it could be a bus or a train, you could expect our components to be there. Within ZF, which is about 45 billion, don't quote me on those numbers, around that range, 160,000 or so employees globally. I'm part of something called the Electronics and ADAS division, ADAS, that stands for Advanced Driver Assistance Systems. So think sensors, think electronic control units or computers in your car, and think software solutions for autonomous driving. So that's what my division within the general scope of ZF is doing. The company itself also has a bunch of other mobility solutions related to braking, steering, electrified transportation, and windmills. If you're curious, if you look up ZF, that's one of the images you might see. The company itself is headquartered in Germany and is set up in a very, I would say, interesting way. The supervisory board is managed, or part of the supervisory board of the company are people, members of the public from the city of Friedrichshafen in Germany. So a very, I would say, non-profit-like setup. The company itself, despite being successfully business-wise, makes a lot of effort to contribute to the society, tries to be a corporate responsible or a responsible corporate citizen. And several of us are involved in topics which involve engaging with the members of the public like we are doing here. So once again, thank you for joining. And then let's maybe get started. As I was thinking about what I will do for this session, I had a few things in mind. We already are through the intro. I wanted to bring into context, not just the altruism of sustainability, the word itself, but also, more importantly, underscore the value it brings in terms of business, right? Sustainability is and can even be bigger engine, no pun intended, or a battery for business, right? So there is money to be made, if I say it very bluntly as a capitalist, in this business, right? So sustainability is not just something which is good for the environment, it is also good for our pocketbooks. And hopefully at the end of this hour, I might be able to make a good case for that. So in that sense, we look at what design thinking is all about. So for those of you who might not have known this term, this is in my life a mantra to be successful, or that drives success. in any project, maybe startup or large companies have had experiences in both, and we'll highlight what that is. We'll highlight what value propositions might be. We'll try to understand how they might be related to a business plan, business case, and most importantly, a business model. From there, we will look into a well-established tool in the innovation space called the business model canvas. We'll look at the 9 elements on that business model canvas. And then we'll try to layer on top of that economic-based canvas, a couple others, meaning social as well as environmental canvases, kind of built on the same model, but developed by a couple of researchers from Canada, Joyce and Paquin, seminal work. And that's where those additional layers, or the 3 layers of sustainability-led business models come in. And like Dejane said, please raise your hand. I might not, you guys are on a different screen, Dejane. So if I don't see a hand raised, just ping me, or, unmute yourself and ask your questions. And if there is time left in the end, which I'm hoping there will be, happy to engage in a discussion. I must also acknowledge a colleague of mine is on the call as well, Anuj Shah, who's also a fellow Wolverine. And along with him and a few others, we tried to push the topic of sustainability forward. All right. So then when I, over my career, I've had equal amounts of time in engineering and strategy. And relatively recently, I've stepped into sustainability. And for me, when I think about sustainability, I think it is a fundamental element of any successful strategy. And if we step back and think about what strategy is all about, right, it is associated with these 5 elements you think about, right? Who's investing money in your company? Who are your customers or end consumers? What kind of regulations you're going to touch? Are you having a engaged and an enabled and a competent workforce? And are you continuously innovating forward? So typically when I, in my past life, prepared strategy sessions or strategy slides, these are some of the chapters, not all of them. These are some of the chapters which were in there. Of course, hidden in here is the finance and other topics, but those goes to investors and some of the customers topics, but they're all in here. And when we think about sustainability, incidentally, those 5 elements suddenly start to become very important for sustainability as well, right? So if we think about investors, ESG topics, environmental, social, and governance topics, now included even in stock exchanges and even for private funding kind of assessment, a lot of companies or a lot of investors now consider those factors as important to make those investments. Consumers, several of us, want to consider what is the impact of the products we buy, the products we use. And there's this distinction between customers and consumers is a subtle one. Within our business, a GM or a Ford might be a customer, but you and I could then be consumers of those vehicles. And from both those ends, there is a pull. For us, our customers, and again, GM, Ford, BMW, whoever that might be, have established requirements associated with sustainability, which we need to work with. Then comes the regulation topic. Depending on whether you're in Asia Pacific or Europe or in North America, there is a gradation of how many regulations or how much regulation there is, but it exists nevertheless, right? So even if these are things about, making sure that harmful chemicals don't enter, the groundwater, or we are using or we are reducing deforestation, right? The first example kind of related to EPA in the US. The second example kind of related to the European Union, who have a regulation focused on reducing deforestation. So we as global companies then have to comply with all of those regulations. And then as a result, sustainability becomes part of our strategy. Having a good sustainability strategy, study after study has shown that this is important for engaged employees. It's important for generations across the board, right? Especially new talent. And then they are, motivated with these, with topics associated with sustainability. Lastly, the topic of innovation. In my mind, this is the next best frontier for innovation. In addition to AI, in addition to, space travel, innovation for sustainability is a big challenge, and we need as many people on board to make that happen. I'm so happy that several of you have decided to invest this hour to be with us on that journey. So then what does that mean, right? So sustainability becomes a business strategy. And then as this strategy, if you look at those driving factors, you're not only considering economics, you're considering social as well as environmental topics. So even intuitively, as you think about sustainability and strategy together, you are already building those three layers, and then we will continue to talk about them throughout this hour now. And then if I were to reflect on what my company does in terms of sustainability, our sustainability strategy is basically called Acting Now. And when we say Acting Now, there are three pillars in there: acting for climate and nature, acting for people, and acting for lasting values. Not spend too much time on that. I think the names give you a general sense of what we are trying to do. And once again, what we see here is we have those three layers, and they don't say economic, social, and environmental, but they are built into those topics. So when we think about creating circular, sustainable products and operations, we are actually talking about economics, right? Clearly, we are talking about people. That is a social topic. And then between the nature and lasting values, somewhere in there is that environmental topic. So even though it's not connected one-to-one, I do in fact see a lot of correlation, even with the work at ZF. Now, did I personally put that strategy together? Parts of it were here before I joined in this role for sustainability. But then as I learned more, as I engaged more, I can clearly see a correlation between what ZF is doing and what we are talking about here in terms of the three layers of that business model. By the way, other companies, other peers of ours have similar approaches. They are also trying to cover all aspects of ESG, in other words, economic, environmental, and social aspects. So, so we are in good company there. One question I get asked all the time: Preet, that's all well and good. What are you specifically doing for the climate? So at this point, what I would like to say is, with several of my colleagues, we are focused on making my company climate neutral by 2040. That doesn't mean zero emissions. That means net emissions will be zero coming out of our chimneys, of our test vehicles, of our operations, and so forth. Where are we standing? As of 2030, we are on track to reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 80%. And then from our supply chain and product use, also known as scope 3 emissions, by about 40%. So we are well on way to becoming climate neutral by 2040. And once again, we are in good company. Several of our peers and our customers are along the same trajectory. Some get there a few years before us, some are a few years after us, but pretty much the entire industry within automotive is headed in that direction. We being in the vicinity of the auto industry headquarters, or the auto industry nerve center for, at least for the US, I think some of you might find that interesting. All right, enough about general topics of sustainability. Perhaps we should now look at, why sustainability forms, or I should say it in a different way. Why is business success, and how is business success associated with strategy, and how does then sustainability concretely starts to fit in? IDEO, a very famous design company, has come up with three I guess, rules for a product to be successful. And you kind of see those overlapping circles in the middle. Of course, for anything to be successful, it has to follow the laws of physics, right? It has to be technologically feasible, right? We see all these fancy gadgets in futuristic sci-fi movies, teleportation and all of that stuff, at least with the known physics, not possible. But yes, if I looked 30 years back into the past, there were things which looked quite feasible, and these are things we use today called the FaceTime or WhatsApp, right? You can actually see and talk to someone, and the sci-fi was showing that in the past, and that I would put in the realm of technological feasibilities of things which are theoretically possible. And when I use the word theory, What I mean is theory based on experimentation, right? So people use the word theory in several different contexts, and the context I have is things that are technically feasible. That's what is theoretically correct for me. The other aspect then is business viability. Can I make money with it? Is my product so expensive? Is the technology so expensive that no one's going to pay for it? That's something which we need to consider. And then on context here within sustainability would be when we first started to talk about electric vehicles, and even today, there is a lot of incentives available to the public to be able to buy them, right? At some point, we'll get to that scale where really no further incentives will be needed. I think we might be close or might be already on the other side. But that aspect of incentives directly relates to business viability. EVs were expensive to make, expensive to buy, and in the interim, the government tried to come in and provide funds to be able to make that business case or that business viable. So technologically feasible, business-wise viable, and that brings to me, in my humble opinion, the most important piece of any successful venture. And that would be desirability, consumer or customer desirability. If no one wants it, then no matter how cheaply, how profitably you can make something, how easily you can make something, it's not going to matter, right? If the people don't desire it, if your customers and consumers don't desire it, then it makes no sense. That fundamentally is the business model in a nutshell, right? So we have to address all of those three topics. Now, I did a mental exercise and I started to think, okay, so where is sustainability? And if we refer to the discussion we had on the previous page, it is everywhere. What I would like to bring out, though, in addition to the feasible, viable, and desirable you see on that slide, if I had to redefine or define for sustainability, I would only bring out this already in here, the word ethic, the word ethical. Should I do something just because I can, right? There are several things which we could do, some in a destructive way, some in a constructive way. And sometimes destructive ways could be more economically viable, right? Should I be putting everything into the landfill, right? Okay, I have my opinions. The answer is no. In my book, we need to find out other ways to be able to make that happen. And that's why I would bring ethical out, right? And if we start to consider the real costs of putting everything into the landfill or pumping the atmosphere with tons of CO2 or even other gases, that will eventually have a cost. That will have a cost in terms of insurance I'll pay in 5 years. That might have a cost in how much my consumers might be able to afford in 10 years. So really, that isn't a problem. It is a problem. The question is not whether it is a problem. The question might be when it might become a problem. And if I really want to be a sustainable business model, work for a company who has been around for 125 years and hope that it'll be here in another 100 years, I need to consider all of those topics. So then really a long-lasting value proposition, that's an important word, we'll cover that. Long-lasting value proposition comes from addressing the technical topic, the business topic, the customer consumer topic, and oh, by the way, we need to be ethical in making those decisions. So when we think about strategy, we just talked about the business outcomes, the positive business outcomes or business success. And then we talked about the desirability of the end consumer or the desirability of the customer. And when we start to think about the desirability of the customer, the term value proposition comes to the center. And I took a simple diagram from a company called Strategyzer, who has done a lot of work in this area of business models and value propositions. But I think this diagram also quite simply explains what this topic is all about. A value proposition is very, very squarely addressing the customer desirability piece. Yes, intrinsically, it is also talking about, the business aspect, the business viability, and perhaps indirectly also the technical feasibility, but it starts with the customer. And it addresses three main things. what is a customer or a consumer, I'll use that term interchangeably here, trying to do, right? If it is a vehicle, I'm trying to go from point A to point B without getting hurt, right? And then what are some of my gains? My gains are I can independently arrive at my destination and I can take detours along the way. And what might be my pains? My pains might be the vehicle is consuming too much gasoline or the battery does not have enough range. So that kind of gives me a sense of what my customer is desiring, right? To do in terms of jobs, to gain, to achieve gains, and to remove pains. And now, if I were to design solutions which actually address all of those topics, or some of those topics more effectively, suddenly I have a value proposition which will make my solution very desirable to a consumer or a customer. So then what we see here is strategy drives or tries to achieve business success, and business success is then built on value proposition. So that's what we've talked about so far. I'll pause there if someone had a quick question, and then we'll go to the next step here. Once, right? Then we'll continue to move forward. So then talking a little bit about the business model itself, right? So business model is something which is based on the value proposition, is built on top of the value proposition. And important things to consider in the business model is what are you offering? So the who, what, how, right? Who are you offering stuff to? Your customer profile. What are you giving that customer? So details of your product offering, how and how much would give you cost structures, and where do you want to sell? So that's the general description of what a business model might be. And then that gives you a sense of within the context of desirability, feasibility, and the business and feasibility in terms of business, customer, and technology, a full coverage of various elements. So it is a description. A business model, let me say it again, is a description of how you will make business success. And the linchpin here again is the customer, the value proposition. Now, full honesty, I've seen the insides of a business school, but I'm an engineer at heart, and several of my colleagues, and I might be guilty of that, have used a few other terms interchangeably. And I just wanted to highlight that in this forum, that a business model might be different than a business plan, right? So business plan builds on the business models, and then it gives a sense of what the vision and the goals and the strategies of an entire business might be, right? So we layer on these other things which move towards business success. Some of these things we talked previously. And then a business case just shows you whether you'll be able to make a little bit more money, right? So these concepts are interrelated, but they're separate, right? So business model describes the various elements, essential elements of business success. A business plan is more holistic, which builds on top of the business models. A business plan could have several business models. And then a business case then gives you a sense of whether you'll be able to make money with a certain project, right? So it's a subset in my mind of the business model then. So looking more deeply on the business model, I would, if you've not already experienced this, would want you to maybe take some time. There are good short 5-minute YouTube videos, and look for the business model canvas by Strategyzer. It is a really powerful tool, and that's what I'm referring to here. It's basically a visual strategic management tool. And then this tool really focuses on the business models, the middle layer we saw in the previous slide. It is good to use for new and existing products, right? So if you have a current product offering or a software or a service, doesn't matter, you can document it to see how to make an assessment of how effective that might be. Or if you're working on a new one, you can create those business models for the new applications, new solutions as well. One thing I have to note is that it is not one and done kind of a deal. It'll so-called be a living document with 9 blocks, and we'll see those blocks in a second. And I must cite Alexander Osterwalder about in mid-aughts, 2005, with a lot of work at the University of St. Gallen, is my understanding, in Switzerland, who initially came up with that approach. And it is very widely used throughout the automotive industry and others. So without spending too much time on the history lesson there, what are these 9 elements on the business model canvas? And now we are starting to look at these 3 layers. We are at the first layer. This is the first layer based on economics. In the middle, you kind of see the value proposition, what we talked about in pains, gains, and the jobs of the customer in the previous slide. On the left, if I may, that's the cost side of things. So this is where we are saying what kind of key activities I'll have to do. Programming, for example, logistics, for example. What are the key resources I'll need? I need a quantum computer. I'm just making that up, right? Or what kind of partners I might need. So those are the cost element. On the right side, you'll start to see how do I make money with relations with certain customers, selling through channels, right? Do I want to do a service which is completely on the cloud, or will I make deliveries, or whatever else they might be? And what are some of the customer and market segments I need to address, right? Is it going to be a luxury high-end product, or is it going to be a quick use, reusable, some sort of product? So the right side then starts to give you a sense of how will you make money. And the last 2 at the base, you kind of see the cost structure and the revenue streams, right? And some of the pricing models. So kind of aligned with the topics on the top, but this is where you start to write your mathematical equation from the cost structure on the left and revenue stream on the right. When I say mathematical equation, this is a concept or a starting point, right? You're thinking about inputs and outputs and not actually writing your EBIT or a profit formula there, but starting points. What does that look like? And there is a likeness of Alexander. This is something from a furniture store. You kind of get a sense of what that value proposition could be from that furniture store, right? So you want an exact height, you want it to be delivered under a week, right? So those are some of the expectations for a piece of furniture. Let's say a chair, you might want, right? You don't want it too heavy, you want it for a certain height, right? Maybe a high bar table or something, and then you don't want to wait for a very long period. So you can now start to think within Michigan. Gardner White could be someone who could come to mind, their website, talking about their website. Then you start to see how we are engaging with our customers, right? Are we doing social media? Are we doing some newsletters? How are we getting to our customers? It says through schools or daycares. They could be resellers, through resellers, meaning that a reseller could go to a ton of schools or a ton of daycares, and your chairs could be sold there. Other examples of key partners could be companies who will create a website for you or do some distribution. And then here is an example of the basis of that mathematical formula, right? And the way I will make money is furniture or chairs for the bedroom or the dining room or the study. Or on the operation side, I will need to pay my staff. I'll need to rent a place. I'll need to, buy some key resources. I don't know, some sort of automated saw, which I have to invest in. I'm just making stuff up. But in one fair swoop, you can kind of see everything associated with that business, right? This is not the detailed calculation you will have for a business case, but it gives you enough to be able to get started and consider some of the key activities. So then to make it even more crisp, what I thought was coffee is a pretty safe choice. And I can try to show you for Nespresso, the coffee machine Nespresso, what that could look like. And this is for their home machines, obviously. That's the limitation I put in there. The value proposition for the end customer there is to be able to have a high quality espresso at home, right? If you look at Nespresso's website, they have these various fancy machines. Elegant looking machines is my definition of fancy, with very nicely crafted pods. And these pods previously used to be, my understanding is I've not personally seen them, of plastic. Since then, they've made mostly aluminum, easier to recycle, but it gives you really high quality espresso, and that's what they limit themselves with. Hard to find an espresso, relatively hard to find an espresso hot chocolate or a flavored drink. The kind of limit themselves to that value. And then who are they selling to? And again, the value proposition is still important. It's a high-end restaurant quality espresso at home. So then they're looking for, within that context, looking to work with professionals who are or people who might have retired at home. Not all boomers are retired, I understand that, but just making a point there. So that's how you kind of see that in this case, the machine Nespresso is talking about is something you can use at home. Now they have solutions, commercial solutions also, but because they have defined their value propositions and the customer segments as such, that will determine what happens on the rest of the canvas here. So then how would they reach those professionals? Through a call center or through a website? There are branded boutiques out there. I know I've seen shops where you can buy these materials. And then in terms of resources, you kind of see some of the things they are considering patents or production plants and so forth. And finally, on the costs and revenue side of things, you kind of see the similar examples, what we saw on the furniture store. So again, business model canvas is a line in the sand, and you can continue to progress further from that line and make improvements as more and more things come in. Another thing I would say is, for a different product, we might want to then think about a different kind of output. So for example, if there were a commercially focused machine, some of these segments might change. Some of those partners might change, because now you're no longer looking at the coffee machines. You might also want to look at large office buildings, high rises, who might then stock your machines, maybe on a rent basis or whatever else that might be. So again, work in progress and different business model canvases for different types of products. We'll continue to use the Nespresso example, and then you'll be able to see how the environmental and social aspects kind of align with that. So we come to the one of the main discussion points for today is, how does environmental and social aspects then help or get in right into that business model canvas? And this is where the two researchers I referenced earlier, Joyce and Taquan, did really seminal work, I think, to be able to bring additional context to enhance the economic layer, which we just saw on the previous slide, to start innovating with those two aspects in mind. In a little bit, you'll start to see how they connect to each other and how they result in what I said earlier, sustainability. There is money in this business, right? So you can do the right thing and still make the money, and that's what this is all about. So in general, what environmental approach does is it takes into the entire consideration, the entire life cycle. So extracting something out of the ground and then putting it back into the ground, hopefully not putting it back in the ground, that cradle to grave and then back to the cradle, right? Somehow that entire approach is considered in that environmental approach. And then on the social side of things, you start to think about how various stakeholders, direct or indirect, might be impacted with that economic layer. So then shifting gears, going further, what does that environmental business model look like? It'll be more or less the same. Instead of the value proposition, you start to see the functional value in the middle. I'll show you the example from Nespresso in a second. Instead of cost and benefit, you see the environmental impacts on the minus side, on the cost side, and then the benefits for the environment in the revenue side. So those are kind of aligned. And then instead of the customer segment, you start to see the use space on the upper right there, or on the right there, right? You also see elements associated with distribution. What will you do with your products at the end of life? How will you make your products? What kind of materials you use? Who will supply you those inputs or ingredients, right? You can think about this in terms of a service as well. If this was a AI data center, right, those become partners, and those are then becoming your production sites and so forth. So in general, that's what the environmental business model looks like. In the interest of time, you'll have these slides, Deshane, and I will figure out a way to make those available. But those definitions then are here. In the interest of time, I will not read through those quite straightforward. But what I want to show you is from the Nespresso example, how does an environmental business model, environmental approach to innovation, if I may call it that, relate with the economic discussion we saw earlier. So when we say functional value, if you remember, the value proposition was for someone to drink fancy coffee at home, and paraphrasing in a different set of words. But now here we say deliver 40 milliliters of espresso coffee, and then this is multiplied by however many customers or consumers there might be. So very functionally, we are delivering coffee once daily for a set amount of people. And then what you also start to see here is some sense of, and don't go with the math, I hate certain sticky notes, but what we're trying to say is various aspects of the cost side or the benefit side, and the benefit side and the cost side, what is impacting the environment. You start to see at the bottom, the carbon footprint of the various impacts. So we're measuring the impact in terms of the carbon footprint, and there is a lot of work which is being done to calculate the carbon footprint. So a lot of standardization exists. And then we kind of see that half of it comes from production, 1/4 of it comes from the use of the machine itself. Remember, you're plugging into the wall and still getting electricity out, and 1/3 from the farming itself. And then when we look underneath, coffee preparation and capsule production, they kind of go into this topic and that topic, right? So they're all coming down into that environmental impact. On the benefit side of things, we are already talking about machine redesign. We're starting to bring in the topics of circularity. These are things that happen towards the end of the lifetime or extending the lifetime, right? So what we are saying here is, if we redesign the machines in a certain way, we might be able to reduce the carbon footprint. There are very many elements of this, and there is some discussion I'm having with the university of offering this class as a full day. We could go into a lot of detail there, but what we are really saying is for stuff which Nespresso can do in this case, and for scope 3, which with the suppliers and the end consumers, there might be opportunities we might be able to bring forward to be able to reduce the carbon footprint. In this case, one example I could give is how much electricity is pulled through running of that machine. Can I make the layers of the housing thinner? Can I use a different type of alloy to produce the surface finishes that I hope to achieve with that elegant design? Can I use recycled aluminum, for example, right? And then can I use the capsules, which I know from experience now, we bought one after I started to put this example together, which are totally made out of aluminum. I can actually put that in recycle and not worry about the layers of plastic and some of the other things and separating that out. Can I actually do that? What you see in the background is a machine which sits at various resorts at Disney in the back there. And I can also tell you that most of the capsules there as well are made out of aluminum and completely recyclable. And that's kind of what we talk about when we say environmental benefit and hopefully reducing the carbon footprint. So that's the environmental layer. So now shifting gears and thinking about social aspects of that same business model. In here, we are starting to see, instead of environment, we are looking at the social impacts. And when we say social, we are thinking about all the stakeholders who are involved. This is not only the end users and but also could be the communities in which the users reside. This is also talking about employees who might be on site working, and then the governance, the rules, the ethical rules which we bring forth when we are doing business. So this could be things such as not accepting bribes. This could be things such as not underpaying people, right? So governance principles start to show up. Also included in here are social and cultural topics of how you reach out to your consumers. You know, are you trying to sell, and I'm being sarcastic here, a vape by making it candy flavored and making accessible to people under 18, which is illegal, right? So is that something which has somehow creeped into your solution? And this offers an opportunity to then even eliminate that, or this approach or this business, this canvas, eliminate that, or not even consider this in the beginning. So it gives you those 9 elements, and you can parse that out to think logically. Once again, the definitions are included, but I think better example would be, since we are talking, only I'm talking to look at it from the Nespresso view. So now, if you pay attention to what is happening for the end user, we are considering things the end user will value. So this is where we are thinking of that retiree, of the professional working at home. What are they expecting? They're expecting some sort of a caffeine boost. They're expecting some specific type of taste, some specific temperature, right? The espresso machines have a temperature where you can start drinking right away. It's not super hot and not super cold, right? So they've thought that through. If you think about the communities, right? So they're thinking about farmers who are making their thinking about rainforests. If you think about, just looking at some other topics here, they're thinking about global approach, right? So within that global approach, they are thinking about how the coffee is impacting the various cultures through which they operate, right? So having the right kind of packaging, which is recyclable, having the right kind of pods, which are only one use, but somehow not go to the landfill, have an opportunity to recycle. That is a cultural consideration they've made for all of those 60 countries in which they operate. So again, examples of how while thinking about making an elegant coffee machine, you can also think about the environmental impacts and be able to extract value and make it more value proposition more attractive, play a good role in the social setup in which you are operating. And all 3 of these, and I'm going to say this again, offer an opportunity for innovation, offer an opportunity to stand out versus some of the other products which are out there in the marketplace, right? And while creating value and generating money for the host company. So if anything in this 1 hour, I want you to take away is sustainability is, yes, definitely an altruistic thing to do, but there is a lot of innovation, and as a result, a lot of opportunity to make money for yourself, for your employers, and that really can help drive this message forward. I am sometimes called right? I'm hopelessly optimistic, and this is where I'm thinking the sustainability makes a business case for all of us to look more deeply in, and then start to make changes within our organizations, within our social structures, to start bringing innovation with sustainability in mind. Before we go towards the concluding discussion, one thing which I'd like to underscore again is all 3 of these layers are interrelated. You can kind of see the economic layer on the top, the social in the middle. This is not in terms of priority or importance. It is just trying to show that there needs to be consistency when you're thinking about innovative solutions, developing those for yourself, or looking to redo your existing product offerings. There needs to be a vertical coherence, meaning that the functional value needs to match with the social, or the value proposition, or some of the other things associated with these canvases. And they also need to have a horizontal coherence, meaning that on one end, you cannot say that I want to be recyclable on the revenue side or the positive side for the environment. And then on the left, you have no partners, to be able to make that happen, right? So there needs to be a coherence horizontally and vertically as you work with these topics. If you've not tried the business model canvas, once again, what I will say is you have to create a first full draft, then try it out with your colleagues, say if they make sense. More importantly, try it out with your consumers directly in terms of a verbal description or perhaps with a prototype. And same could also be applied to the environmental as well as the social topics. Once you have put this down, try it out, as a proof of concept, see what feedback you're getting. And then with a few cycles, you'll be able to come up to a certain solution or certain maturity where you are comfortable, and then desirability, business viability, and technical feasibility topics, right? So this is not only coherent horizontally and vertically, but also temporally, right? Over time, you would hope that the information on the document is more mature in terms of being validated by your consumers. So what I will leave you with is, if I may have a call for action, if I can say, what should be something you should think about on your drive back home or when you have a quieter moment, is how can the products and services we engage with today, right? These might not be products you are making today or your employer is making today. You might still be at school, or you might have desires to be an entrepreneur. How might those products and services which you could engage with today and in the future become horizontally and vertically coherent while considering the social, economic, and environmental? That I will pause, open to Q&A, discussion, any other thoughts that you might have. Right, no questions. I think I did a good job then. I'll take it this way. But if you have questions after today, I am available on LinkedIn. That's the only social media presence I have. Reach out to me. I'm happy to connect, happy to engage in discussions in the future. And if there is anything I could do to move the topic of sustainability forward, happy to do that.